My boss tried to fire me, so I took her job. If you would have told me a year ago that I'd be sitting in my old boss's office, not as her assistant, not as her employee, but as her replacement, I probably would have laughed. Not because I didn't think I could do it, but because back then I didn't see it coming. I didn't see her coming. Her name was Dana. She was the type of boss who smiled at you just a little too long. The kind who remembered everyone's birthday, but not because she cared, because it made her look good. She loved power, loved control, and what she hated most was anyone getting too comfortable around her. Especially me. I didn't know it at first, but from the second I started getting compliments from higher-ups, from the second clients started asking for me by name, from the second my ideas in meetings started getting real attention, Dana saw me as a threat. And the thing about people like Dana, they don't confront you directly. They undermine you slowly. She started with extra tasks, piling things on last minute, setting impossible deadlines, making me look like I was just barely keeping up. Then came the passive-aggressive comments. The meetings I wasn't invited to. The small mistakes she suddenly treated like massive failures. And then, she tried to fire me. No warning. No write-ups. No real reason. Just a quiet little meeting in her office where she told me it wasn't working out. Like she'd won. Like she'd gotten rid of me. But what Dana didn't know was that while she was busy playing office politics, I'd been paying attention to everything. And I wasn't walking out of that building empty-handed. Not then. Not ever. I didn't always work under Dana. When I started at the company, she was in another department, someone I'd occasionally pass in the hallway or see leading a big meeting with the kind of energy that made everyone sit up straighter. She had a reputation. Smart. Polished. Cutthroat. But she wasn't my concern. I worked in a different division with a different manager, one who saw potential in me early and gave me room to grow. I stayed late, took initiative, volunteered for projects nobody else wanted. It wasn't about impressing anyone. I just liked the work. And after years of grinding behind the scenes, I finally started to see movement. More responsibility. More face time with leadership. Invites to meetings I didn't used to be in. And then came the promotion, one that put me right in Dana's orbit. She was promoted shortly after I was, except her new title placed her directly above me. She didn't interview me. She didn't review my work. But suddenly, she was in charge of the division I was making waves in, and I could feel it the second she took over. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. She was professional, friendly enough, asked questions during meetings and gave decent feedback. She smiled when I spoke and complimented my presentations in front of others. But behind the scenes, things started shifting. Slowly, she began asking me to CC her on everything, even things that had nothing to do with her role. She'd reschedule meetings last minute, then forget to loop me in when they were rescheduled. She started showing up to client calls I was leading, saying she just wanted to observe. And the worst part, she started pitching my ideas. Same structure, same phrases, slight tweaks. Only now they were coming out of her mouth and being credited to her name. That's when I realized she wasn't mentoring me. She was studying me. And the second my name started coming up more than hers, she started positioning herself to push me out. Once I started noticing the shift, I tried to tell myself it was just an adjustment period. Dana was new to the role. Maybe she was just figuring out how to manage a team she didn't build. Maybe she was trying to understand the landscape before stepping fully into it. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But then things stopped being subtle. She started taking things away. Small things at first. Projects I'd been leading were quietly reassigned for bandwidth reasons. I'd get calendar invites for meetings I had been scheduled to present in, only to find my name removed from the agenda when I joined the call. And when I asked her about it, she was always polite, smiling. Oh, that was probably just a mix-up. I'll make sure it's corrected. But nothing ever changed. In fact, it kept getting worse. The final straw came during an executive check-in, a quarterly meeting where every department head gave a brief update. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing my slides, coordinating with our design and product teams, collecting metrics, and writing the narrative. And when the day of the presentation came, Dana emailed me the morning of the meeting to say, "I'll take it from here." That was it. No explanation. No warning. She stood up in that meeting and presented every word I'd written like it was hers. She used my phrasing, my strategy. She even stumbled through parts she clearly didn't understand. And when leadership praised her for being so in touch with the frontline execution, she just nodded. That moment shifted something in me. I realized this wasn't just professional tension. She wasn't trying to manage me. She was trying to erase me. And for the first time, I understood that being talented in the wrong room wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. Because to someone like Dana, a woman like me wasn't a rising star. I was a threat. By the time Dana called me into her office to talk, I already had a feeling something was off. She'd been extra cheerful that week, overly friendly in meetings, dropping by my desk with compliments that felt a little too rehearsed. And while everyone else seemed to take her sudden warmth as a good sign, I knew better. Dana didn't do warm without purpose. So when she closed the door behind me and sat down with this calm, rehearsed expression, I braced myself. She started with the usual pleasantries. You've done some great work here. You've grown a lot. You have a strong presence with clients. And then she shifted. But I've noticed lately, there's been some tension, some disconnect. And unfortunately, I'm not sure this is still the best fit. That's how she said it. Not, you're being let go. Not, we've decided to end your employment. Just a vague corporate shrug, like we were two people breaking up over brunch. I asked her if I had done something wrong. She smiled. It's not about right or wrong. It's about alignment. I asked if there had been any complaints, any documented issues, any performance conversations I wasn't aware of. She waved it off. Sometimes things just shift, and just like that, I was out. No warning. No paper trail. No HR present. Just a woman sitting in her glass office, watching another woman walk out. Like that was supposed to be the end of it. But what Dana didn't know was that I'd already seen the signs. I had documentation. I had emails. I had receipts. And I'd already started talking, not to coworkers, not to friends, but to people who mattered. Because while Dana was plotting how to get rid of me, I'd been planting seeds in places she never thought to look. And her office was about to have a brand new name on the door. Walking out of Dana's office that day felt strange in a way I still don't know how to fully explain. I wasn't shocked. Not really. But I was unsettled. You spend so much of your adult life building a sense of control, telling yourself that if you work hard, keep your head down, stay professional, you'll be protected. That you'll be seen. That you'll be valued. But that's not always how it goes. And on that day, in that quiet corner office with its view of the parking lot and the framed motivational quote on the wall, all that effort I'd poured in felt like it had just evaporated. Dana didn't gloat. She didn't yell. She didn't even flinch. She said her lines the way I imagined she rehearsed them in the mirror that morning. Polished, vague, and full of carefully chosen words designed to leave no trace of blame. It wasn't personal. It wasn't about my performance. It was about fit. She smiled like we were discussing weekend plans, not my livelihood. And when it was over, she extended her hand across the desk like she was offering closure, not insult. I didn't take it. Not because I was angry. Not because I was trying to make a statement. But because in that moment I saw her for exactly what she was. Not a mentor. Not a leader. Just a woman who had clawed her way to the top and now treated every ambitious woman under her as a threat to be neutralized. I stood up, thanked her for the opportunity, and walked out with my back straight and my voice steady. She expected me to cry, to break, to protest, to give her something she could carry to HR and twist into a story where she was the victim. But I didn't give her any of that. I walked through the office one last time and saw the way people avoided eye contact, not because they didn't care, but because they already knew. They'd seen the writing on the wall for weeks, maybe longer. I packed my things slowly. Every photo, every post-it note, every marker I'd used to bring life to a cubicle I thought I'd grow out of, not be forced out of. And when I left, I didn't slam the door or make a speech. I just nodded at the security guard, stepped into the elevator, and let the silence speak for me. Because I knew something Dana didn't. I wasn't walking away defeated. I was walking away documented. Everything she'd done, the missed emails, the reassigned projects, the way she'd deliberately excluded me from key meetings while pretending it was all an oversight, I had it all. Screenshots, emails, calendar trails, client communications with my name on them, even Slack messages where she tried to smooth things over after stealing my presentation one week, calling it a miscommunication. I hadn't saved those things with revenge in mind. At first, I saved them because I didn't trust her. And then, as time went on, I saved them because I didn't trust the system. Because women like Dana don't get removed for being manipulative, they get promoted for being efficient. Unless someone steps in with proof. And I had proof. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't disappearing. Not quietly. Not completely. Not this time. For weeks after I left that office, I kept thinking about the same thing. How many women before me had gone through the exact same thing? Walked out of that building feeling small, discarded, wondering if it was somehow their fault. Wondering if maybe they had been too ambitious. Too vocal. Too visible. Because that's what women like Dana count on. They don't need to be cruel to push you out. They just need to make you doubt yourself enough to leave quietly. But what Dana didn't know about me is that I wasn't built to disappear. I didn't start my career dreaming about revenge. I wasn't collecting emails and saving receipts because I thought I'd need to use them as armor. That's not how I operate. But over time, after the meetings I wasn't invited to, after the projects I led suddenly got presented under Dana's name, after the subtle digs about my attention to detail or leadership readiness, I realized I had to protect myself because nobody else was going to do it for me. And so I paid attention. I started making folders, quiet little spaces on my hard drive where I tucked away every project brief I created, every draft deck, every client compliment that came directly to me, not to Dana. I forwarded confirmation emails to my personal account. Not company secrets. Not sensitive data. Just proof. Proof that the work Dana was suddenly trying to take credit for wasn't hers. Proof that the person she was painting in her narrative, unreliable, unprepared, not ready for leadership, didn't exist. Because if she wanted to build that story about me, she was going to have to work a lot harder. And so I kept building my file. Not just because I needed it, but because I could feel something coming. She'd gotten sloppy. In her rush to push me out, she'd made mistakes. Big ones. There was a client she'd promised deliverables to without looping me in. Deliverables I had already created weeks earlier. There were budget allocations that didn't match the project scope because she hadn't consulted the team leads. Little cracks. Tiny gaps. Things most people might miss, but I didn't. Because while Dana was out there trying to rewrite my story, I was over here writing a completely different one. One she couldn't control. One built on facts. One with receipts. And I knew exactly who I was going to show it to. Not my coworkers. Not the office gossips. But the people who mattered most. The ones with real power. HR. Leadership. And the senior executives who thought Dana was this polished, perfect leader. Because that's all they'd ever been allowed to see. Until now. Walking into that HR meeting didn't feel like a victory. Not at first. It felt like work. Real work. Because standing up for yourself in a corporate environment isn't about being loud. It isn't about storming into rooms or pointing fingers or making grand speeches. It's about details. Proof. Calm, steady facts that speak louder than whatever story someone else is trying to tell. That's exactly what I brought with me that day. I remember sitting in the lobby, portfolio in my lap, watching people pass by. Some of them smiling politely, some of them whispering because by now everyone knew I was leaving. What they didn't know was that I wasn't walking away empty-handed. When HR called me in, I could tell immediately that the woman I was meeting with wasn't expecting much. Maybe a short conversation. Maybe a few parting complaints about how things ended. But then I pulled out my file. And everything changed. I started at the beginning. I laid out my performance history. Reviews that exceeded expectations, peer feedback that spoke to my leadership, emails from clients who thanked me directly for the work Dana was trying to claim. I walked them through projects, the timelines, the deliverables, the ownership trail that led directly back to me. But what really got their attention? The budget inconsistencies. I showed them where Dana had approved spend that didn't align with project scopes. I pointed out where money had been allocated to initiatives that, on paper, didn't exist. Not stolen money. Not fraud. But carelessness. Sloppy, arrogant carelessness from someone who was too busy managing appearances to manage her team. And I could see it on the HR manager's face. That moment when she realized this wasn't about sour grapes or office politics. This was real. This was the kind of thing that gets escalated. The kind of thing that gets investigated. And me, I just kept talking. Calm. Direct. Professional. Because I wasn't here to tear Dana down. I was here to protect my name. My work. My reputation. By the end of the meeting, HR wasn't just thanking me for my time. They were asking me to email everything over so they could open a formal review. And I walked out of that room knowing exactly what was going to happen next. Because people like Dana can steal credit. They can manipulate narratives. They can push good people out of rooms. But they always leave a trail. And I had just handed HR the map. Leaving that HR meeting didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closure. For the first time in months, I walked out of that building without the weight sitting on my chest. The one that comes from knowing you're being targeted but not having the words or the space to prove it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't run to tell anyone what I'd done. Instead, I went home, sat on my couch, and just let myself feel still for the first time in a long time. And honestly, that quiet felt better than anything else. But deep down, I knew things weren't over yet. Corporate machines move slow. There are processes, investigations, documentation reviews, leadership discussions behind closed doors. I knew that HR wasn't going to come out swinging immediately. Not with someone like Dana, who had spent years building relationships with people at the top. But I also knew I had planted something she couldn't control. Doubt. Real, undeniable doubt. And doubt spreads fast in offices like ours. Over the next week, I started to feel the shift. Little things at first. People who had barely made eye contact with me after I left Dana's office were suddenly friendlier, checking in, asking about my plans, even apologizing quietly for how things went down. An email popped into my inbox from an internal recruiter I barely knew. Nothing aggressive, nothing obvious, just a simple line. Would love to catch up this week if you're free. And when I took that meeting, everything became clear. Leadership was reassessing Dana's role, which, in corporate speak, means HR had seen enough to know there was a problem, even if they weren't saying it out loud yet. I learned that while I was packing up my things and walking away, HR had been busy doing exactly what I hoped they would, pulling budget reports, interviewing team members, reviewing client feedback. All roads led to the same conclusion. Dana looked good on paper, until you looked closer. Until you realized the real work was coming from other people. Until you realized the success she was selling to leadership wasn't sustainable because it wasn't even hers to begin with. And that's the thing about people like Dana. They climb fast, but they build shaky ladders. Ladders held together by stolen credit, half-truths, and the assumption that nobody beneath them will ever have the power or the nerve to push back. But I wasn't beneath her anymore. And the very people she'd tried so hard to impress? They were finally seeing her for exactly who she was. It was about 10 days after I met with HR when I got the email. It was short, no fanfare, no explanation. Just a calendar invite titled, Leadership Roundtable, Strategic Growth Planning. I almost didn't accept. Not because I wasn't qualified to be in the room, but because I wasn't sure if this was a real opportunity or some quiet attempt to wrap things up cleanly, professionally, maybe even sweep it all under the rug with a handshake and an NDA. But something about the timing told me otherwise. So I clicked yes. And when I showed up that morning, the first thing I noticed was the room. This wasn't some HR debrief or a simple feedback session. This was a table full of people who made decisions. The people Dana had always tried to impress. VPs, directors, the kind of leaders who didn't show up for just anything. There were folders laid out, notebooks, a screen at the end of the room with my name listed on the presentation deck. No Dana in sight. I was greeted by the same internal recruiter who'd emailed me earlier. She smiled like this was just another normal meeting, but I could tell by the way she leaned in when she spoke to me that something had shifted. We wanted your input on some of the growth initiatives you were building under Dana, she said. Your name's been coming up a lot. I didn't show it, but inside I felt that click, that silent confirmation that everything I'd done, everything I'd documented, had landed exactly where it needed to. This wasn't a formality. This was a soft pitch. They weren't just reviewing my work. They were vetting me. I gave them what they asked for, clearly, confidently, without over-explaining. I walked them through the structure I'd built, the projects I'd led, and the outcomes I'd delivered. I answered questions about vision, timelines, risk mitigation. All the things Dana had glossed over with polished buzzwords. And when I left that room, I didn't have a job offer. Not yet, but I had something better. Respect. And space. For the first time, I wasn't being seen through Dana's filter. I wasn't the junior team member or the ambitious analyst with potential. I was the one who'd kept things running. And they finally saw it. After that meeting, things moved faster than I expected. Not publicly, not in a way anyone outside that leadership circle could immediately see. But behind the scenes, you could feel the ground shifting. People started talking to me differently. Emails from senior leadership had a new tone. Warmer, more direct, more personal. People who had once treated me like just another cog in the machine were suddenly looping me into strategic conversations. Asking for my thoughts. inviting me to discussions that I never would have been invited to under Dana's shadow. And Dana? Well, I didn't see her much after that. She was still around, still at her desk, still playing the role of boss in front of the team. But there was a stiffness about her now, a quietness I'd never seen before. Whatever HR had uncovered, whatever leadership had discussed after that roundtable, it had landed, and it had landed hard. I learned later that she'd been put on a performance improvement plan, which, in corporate speak, is the first step before someone gets shown the door or given the chance to leave quietly before it gets that far. The irony of it didn't escape me. The same woman who had tried so hard to undermine me, who had manipulated every tool at her disposal to push me out without documentation, without warning, was now sitting in performance meetings about her own shortcomings. And me, I stayed patient. I did my job. I kept my head down, not out of fear, but because I didn't need to gloat. She knew. Everyone who mattered knew. And while Dana was busy trying to hold her crumbling narrative together, I was busy stepping into rooms she was no longer invited to. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was complete. Every fake smile she'd ever given me, every dismissive comment, every time she'd tried to make me feel small, all of it had led her exactly here. And me, I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Because once you stop surviving and start building, nobody like Dana can touch you again. When the official offer came through, it caught me off guard. Not because I didn't think I deserved it, but because of how simple it was. No big announcement. No dramatic reveal. No grand gesture from leadership acknowledging what had happened. Just an email. The subject line was as plain as any other. Internal opportunity, senior manager, strategic operations. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it was everything. Everything Dana thought I wasn't ready for. Everything she'd tried to gatekeep. Everything she had quietly stolen credit for, convinced I wouldn't survive without her approval. I sat with that email longer than I probably needed to. Not because I doubted whether or not I should accept. I knew I was ready, but because of how full circle it all felt. This wasn't just any promotion. This was her job. Reorganized, rebranded, rewritten on paper maybe, but unmistakably hers in every way that mattered. And now, it was being offered to me. I thought back to every quiet moment I'd had to endure to get here. Every ignored email. Every stolen project. Every meeting where Dana had spoken over me like I didn't even exist. And I realized this offer wasn't about revenge. It was about alignment. The right person. In the right seat. At the right time. And for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I signed the offer. And when I walked back into that building, not as an assistant, not as someone working beneath Dana, but as a leader in my own right, everything about the energy shifted. People noticed. Some congratulated me openly. Others just smiled quietly, knowing exactly what it had taken for me to get here. And Dana? She was gone. Not in some scandalous, headline-making way. Just gone. Reassigned to another office. Another role. Another corner of the company where people didn't yet know how she operated. Leadership called it a strategic realignment. I called it what it was, consequences. But I didn't need her to lose for me to win. What I needed was peace. I needed purpose. I needed to know that no matter how hard she tried to erase me, I had stayed true to myself. And sitting in that new office with my name on the door, that was all the closure I needed. There's something you don't expect when you finally get what you worked for. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not even satisfying in the way people imagine it will be. It's quieter than that. Heavier too. Because when the noise stops, the politics, the damage control, the second-guessing, what's left is just you, sitting with what it took to get there. The day I moved into that office, I didn't decorate right away. I unpacked slowly. A framed photo. A mug from a conference I'd spoken at before Dana tried to take me off the speaker list. A little notebook I'd filled with scribbles and strategies when I still thought I had to prove something. And then I closed the door. Not because I was hiding, but because I needed a moment. That office had always been a symbol of something I wasn't allowed to reach. The place someone like me was supposed to watch from a distance. It had belonged to Dana, and before her, another woman who had clawed her way into leadership by keeping her head down and saying yes to everything. I don't know her story, but I remember the way she used to look at me in meetings, like she recognized something in me she couldn't say out loud. Now it was mine. Same view, same furniture, different energy. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about what Dana had done to me. I was thinking about what I'd learned. I had learned that competence alone wouldn't protect me. That being the best worker in the room meant nothing if I didn't also know how to navigate power. I had learned that silence wasn't weakness, not when it was strategic. That documentation could be more powerful than confrontation. That the long game was always worth playing, even if nobody claps when you win it. And most of all, I learned that staying true to yourself is the quietest kind of rebellion, and the one that lasts the longest. People still asked about Dana. For a while anyway. They wanted to know what happened, where she went, why things changed. I never said much, because the truth didn't need to be retold once it had already been shown. In the months that followed, the story faded. People stopped asking about Dana. Her name came up less and less in meetings. Her absence stopped being noticeable, and the narrative around her shift in position was quietly rewritten by leadership, as they always do. But for me, the impact lingered. Not because I held on to what she did, but because I couldn't forget what it taught me. Taking her job wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving a point or standing in her old office just to say I made it. It was about reclaiming something I didn't even realize I had been taught to shrink from. My own power. Because for a long time, I played by the rules. I believed if I worked hard, stayed humble, kept my head down, I would be rewarded. I believed that the people above me would see my effort and elevate me when I was ready. But Dana taught me that's not how it works. She taught me that when you shine too brightly in the wrong person's shadow, they'll do whatever they can to block your light. And that surviving that kind of environment isn't about being louder. It's about being smarter, being prepared, being relentless in quiet, strategic ways. I didn't outtalk Dana. I outlasted her, because I chose to trust what I knew about myself, even when everyone around me was being told a different version. And that choice, that self-trust, that's what got me the seat at the table. That's what made me a leader. Not the title, not the office, not the restructuring. The knowledge that I could walk through that fire, stay intact, and come out the other side more grounded than I'd ever been. Sometimes you don't get justice in the form of apologies. Sometimes you don't get the satisfaction of seeing someone fall. Sometimes the most powerful ending is the one where you quietly replace the person who tried to erase you. Not to become them, but to do the job better than they ever could. And I did. Because it was never really her job to begin with. She just kept the seat warm.
Thanks so much for watching. If you love a good revenge story, or if you've ever dreamed of getting the last word without saying much at all, you're in the right place. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new savage ending. Because around here, karma always hits different.